Hey, great people who watch Yusuf Plays. This is Yusuf. I still haven't thought of a good, sort of repeat intro for these sorts of things, off the cuff vlogs and video game discussions, but you'll have to forgive me. What's going on? I am currently hanging out with my parents just for a day or two. They wanted to celebrate my upcoming birthday, so I decided to oblige, and we had a beautiful feast last night, attended by all of our family, friends, and cousins, and things of that nature. So about almost 16, 17 people, pretty good. The horma sabzi, the khoresh badamjun, the Moss, salad olivier, kebab made by yours truly over the charcoal, juji kebab. I mean, it was just truly a stunning meal. One of the great meals of my life. I'm only mentioning it to memorialize it here and just talk about the out-of-body experience I had for a moment while we were all sitting around after eating. I just sort of like stepped back and I was like, whoa, like I'm living a moment that I hope to remember in the future as a good one. You ever have a moment where you're sort of not out of body experience in like a ecstatic in the philosophical sense, not in an ecstatic way, not in an extreme way, but sort of just for a moment, your consciousness steps out of your body for a moment to recognize your surroundings and then steps back in. That happened, but in a joyous way. So I think that sort of sense memory ties into what we're going to be discussing today, which is, I thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss nostalgia, which is a common topic in video gaming, much more so than I think any other medium, because of the nature of art merging with technology and video games being thought of as like a children's sort of hobby or obsession or whatever you'd call them. But I think nostalgia is important to games because it's about play. And as you grow older, people who are adults now tell you to put aside childish things, like movies and video games especially. Because play is not a form of subservience. So when you play, you're doing something for yourself. Now, there are exceptions, like when your boss forces you to go to an escape room. Even though that can be fun. I haven't done it, but play as a form of action, it is subversive to so much of what contemporary society intends for us, the way in which it tries to dominate people, right? So by playing Mario Galaxy, by playing Shadow of the Colossus, by engaging with video games as an art, or even if not that on that level, though they are art and you may not understand that in the moment that you're playing them, even engaging with them as a plaything, as a toy, can be an act of resistance against a world that tells you need to get back to work, because play is usually the opposite. I don't want to say always, I don't want to make grand overarching statements, but play is the opposite of work. And all work and no play makes Yusuf a dull boy. So, why do I say all this? Why do I wax philosophically? It's mostly because nostalgia is tied into gaming like that. When the adults tell you to put your playthings away and join the world as a corporate lawyer or a doctor or just a janitor, custodian, I think is a preferable term. And to put away those things and only remember them fondly as memories, not as things that you can engage with and remember in the present, which is a sort of contradiction, but remember them in the present, re-engage with them, reassess them. But I think that's an important thing to do and an important feeling to engage with, because it allows us to reflect back on who we were, who we are, and who we want to become. So I say all this because the most nostalgic period in my life with video games was probably from around 2001 to around 2012 or 13. And the core part of that memory, the core part of that period was when the PlayStation 3 came out in around 2006. And that's when I first started being given more autonomy and more by my parents, the more ability to get games, trade in games. I would make my own money on occasion by working odd jobs, things like that. It was really the first time that I had a purchasing power to make my own decisions on what sort of games I wanted. And that came to a catastrophic moment when I sold an enormous part of my collection. Every collector has this story, but mine was when I wanted to take a girl to homecoming in high school. And I sold a major part of my collection to fund, the way to ask her out. You got to do like a big sign and like have a whole romantic thing. So I did that, and I remember distinctly when I went to GameStop. I remember a couple games like Paper Mario, Thousand Year Door, Luigi's Mansion, Persona 4, and like Okami, one of my favorite games ever. I think a bunch of stuff, like tons and tons of games. And I remember the two people who worked there. I remember it was a younger guy and then someone else. I remember what he looked like exactly. He had glasses, longer hair, couldn't have been more than like 24. And he just looked at me, he was like, "Are you sure? These are good games." You want to sell the good games? And I was like, "Yeah, I need the money." And he gave me exactly as much as I needed, like 120 or something dollars, exactly as much as I needed to do the homecoming, takeout or whatever, like buy all the candles and all that stuff like that. So, it's always been expensive to live in this country. Don't let anybody tell you differently. Anyways, that was the moment in which I sold away and decided I wanted to become an adult, and immediately regretted it, and then just went back into buying games and things like that. But that was during the PS3 era. And I hadn't sold any PS3 games in that collection, just stuff for the previous generation, PS2 and GameCube. And I'll stop meandering because I don't want this to be too long of a video, but this formative period was when I also had the most time to play games. Obviously I was in school, but I was a good enough student, though I had other things on my mind, mostly playing video games. I was a good enough student, so I could apply my natural smarts, I guess is not a good word for it, but I guess I could apply myself just enough to be a good student, great student, but not have to be like a 4.0 striver. I never was that. I never wanted those things, even though my family wasn't really pushy about that sort of thing, but they would just be like, "Get good grades. Why'd you get a B? Why can't you get an A? Like, are you stupider than other people?" And getting good grades is important and whatever, but it's a form of subservience. Foucault. Anyways, this was the time that I had this was the period that I had the most time to play games, and boy did I play my PS3. That was my system, and I had my Wii as well, and my PS3 was really the central sort of machine in my life. Like it was an escape portal. It was a place that you go to just go into these incredible worlds, and it was the first HD generation of games. We had gotten I remember I bought my PS3 from a guy who worked at the GameStop, my local GameStop. I don't know why he was selling it, but it was like a year after the PS3 or 2 years after the PS3 came out. And I just really, really, really wanted to play Metal Gear Solid 4. That's why I got it, because I loved Metal Gear Solid at the time. A couple years before that, I bought the Metal Gear Solid Collection on PS2. It came with Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3 in like a slipcover box. And I played the hell out of those games, especially Metal Gear Solid 3, still one of my favorites. And I was so excited for Metal Gear Solid 4. So I buy it from him, and I remember he comes to visit our house, and he has that 60 gigabyte model that has PS2 and PS1 backwards compatibility. I'm like, this is a no-brainer. You can play all my PS1 and PS2 games, plus the new PS3 games that are coming out. This must have been around 2008. So he comes, and my parents had just gotten a new TV after like 20 years of having the same crappy TV. And he says, "Oh, wow, you got a really good like system going here." Because my dad was also like, "I want a sound system." Maybe he got like a nice bonus or something. So they got a nice sound system, got a nice big 55-inch TV, which by the way, they kept until like literally 2020. So he was like impressed by the setup, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm gonna do some crazy HD gaming." Like when Metal Gear Solid 4, when I get Metal Gear Solid 4, which I think he gave me the Metal Gear Solid 4 PS3 bundle. I was like, I'm gonna do some crazy gaming on this, and boy did I. I loved that game. Now, I recently revisited it, and I had a tough time, but I'll mention that later. So the PS3 was an incredible period where all I did was game, and I loved it. I have so many memories with it, some of which won't be featured here. For example, one is when I got Final Fantasy 13, which I was super excited for because the only Final Fantasy game I had played before that was Final Fantasy 7, and I hated it. I couldn't get past like the first 4 or 5 hours. I was like, this is boring me to death. And apparently, I wasn't the only one. I was on GameFAQs and Game Trailers and GameSpot all the time back then. Those were my 3 sites. And people were like, this is trash. What happened here? It's visually stunning, and I think it still is. Incredible designs, like, you know, Final Fantasy's always been great at the merging of technology and high fantasy, or the Japanese, sort of through a Japanese filter of high fantasy. But boy, that game sucked, and I think it still does. But the great thing about the PS3 was that it brought many, many PlayStation 2 games into the future, into the HD era with tons of different remasters. And it also introduced, I think, the world and the gaming, for better and worse, the gaming industry to a type of what we call a cinematic game now. PlayStation has always pushed it. I think Metal Gear Solid 1 is maybe arguably the most important game in that sort of lineage. That's what kicked it off. This is cinematic. This is how the combination of cinema and video games, or rather the natural combination of cinema and video games. If film is a combination of literature, theater, music, and theater is a combination of literature and performance, and if all mediums are a combination of the mediums that came before them, then Metal Gear Solid was a point at which we could say film, literature, music, art, etc. came together, and we subsumed previous mediums into a new medium. That was heightened by some games we're going to talk about in the PlayStation 3 era that really took that up a notch. Now, whether that's had a negative effect on video games is a discussion I'll save for a future date, because that's a minefield. And some people say, for example, The Last of Us is the greatest story ever told in games. I think the Craig Mazin, the guy who directed The Last of Us HBO series, said that. And many people replied and said, that's not possible because you could tell it in other mediums. The greatest story that could ever be told in a game is one that could never be told in a film. It's one that's personal only to you. It's one that's exclusively from your experience. It's a memory that arises from a number of systems interacting with each other in a game as a developer intended or maybe didn't intend. Whether that's true or not, I'll leave for more enlightened people than me. But I will say that if you liked video game-ass video games, you would never have a problem, because you would just play tons and tons of remasters on the PlayStation 3. And so, if it wasn't obvious from this discussion, what we're going to do is discuss my entire PS3 collection. Now, many of these games I've always owned since I had my PS3, but about 10 or so of them I recently picked up because I've been feeling nostalgic for the PS3, and because even though I have a good enough job and, you know, I'm not in, you know, any dire straits financially, video game collecting is becoming even, you know, pricing me out. Like, if you want a good PS1 game, like one of the more popular ones, I guess is what to say, or one of the more well-known ones, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which I've told myself I would buy for major life events multiple times, such as passing the bar, turning whatever age. It's like almost $200, $170. Einhander, Square Enix shmup that, you know, wasn't re-released on United Systems, like almost $200. Ape Escape, $60. That's like a super common PS1 game. So thankfully, you got emulation, you got a bunch of different ways to play those games now, but games that aren't able to be played on modern systems like Einhander, it's just too expensive. Like, imagine telling someone else, hey, I paid $200 for like one thing in your hobby. They'd laugh at you. And, you know, it's just ridiculous at this point. So I'm slowing down on that a bit. But PlayStation 3, Wii, and Xbox 360, that generation of games is still very, very reasonable. Now, they're climbing in price, and I think they will at some point, especially if the PlayStation 3 store closes down. But for now, what we've got is a ton of great games, many of which have not been ported into the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch era, and many of which have. But I think that many of their best versions still exist on the PlayStation 3. So if you like PS2 games, such as the Prince of Persia trilogy, you'll love the PS3 because they were all remastered. Now, the quality of these remasters I don't think is great as other ones done in these sort of collections for PlayStation 2. Now, this is actually not my copy. It is on a what must be a decade now loan from a friend in college, Roya. And Roya, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I need to give this back to you if you still want it. Prince of Persia Trilogy on PlayStation 3. Now, truth be told, the original Prince of Persia on the PS2, Xbox and GameCube and PC is one of the most, revolutionary games in terms of integrating storytelling and the nature of games, or the mechanics of games. For example, when you fall into a pit, he's like, "Oh no, that's not how the story went." And there's the time rewinding mechanic. The other two, strangely, went for this dark, gritty, mature tone. Whenever somebody mentions something like that's not straight-faced or even has a sense of comedy, that was like, it's gritty. I think we started using that term when the Nolan Batmans came out. Maybe he said it, maybe somebody else said it, but ever since then we've been shackled with the word gritty. Oh, this is gritty, dark and gritty. I don't know why we still say that. But these are actually attempting to be gritty. These are basically like, they took this game and they're like, what if we listen to a lot of Slipknot? I don't know why they decided to do that, but they did, and I haven't played those. But the original Prince of Persia, I have an original copy on Xbox, which is beautifully emulated on Series X, and I played a couple of hours of it and really enjoyed it. I'd recommend that over the PlayStation 3 version. We also have one of my favorite games of all time, Okami. I remember importing this around when it came out because I was like, wow, one of my favorite games ever is now in HD. I can't wait to play it. And so I imported Okami on eBay. And this is a great version, actually, I think. It's been remastered on PlayStation 4 and all other modern systems as well in 4K, but this one is still really good. I played that PlayStation 4 one and I was like, it's kind of giving me a headache, which never happens to me. But maybe it was like too HD. Frank Ocean said that in a song. That's too real. If you like Hideo Kojima, most of his games were remastered on PlayStation 3. You've got both of the Zoners, the Enders games, PlayStation 2 exclusives. And then you've got also every single, basically, Metal Gear game, from Metal Gear 1 all the way up to Metal Gear Solid 4. This collection contains, I think, every Metal Gear game not released on the PSP, including Peace Walker, which was. But it doesn't have Metal Gear Acid or some of those spin-off games, but this is a lovingly recreated by Bloober. I'm sorry, not Bloober. This is a lovingly recreated by Bluepoint. And it's just an incredibly well-done remaster. Better, actually, than the Master Collection that was released. I played the hell out of it. I beat them all again on this PS3 Collection and loved every moment of it. It's the greatest games ever. Still have not beaten 5. I think it sucks. Now, some recent pickups, actually. I loved all of these games on PS2, but I never picked up these collections on PS3. And we've got the Sly Cooper Collection. All 3 Sly Cooper games, remastered in HD, very well done. All 3 Jak and Daxter games, also remastered in HD. I never played 2 and 3. Loved 1. I've actually been playing 1. I was just playing it a couple hours ago. Great game. One of the best 3D platforms of all time. Up there with Mario. I know it sounds insane, but up there with Mario, Jak and Daxter, the original. And then some of my favorite games on PS2, legitimately up there with Shadow of the Colossus, was the Ratchet and Clank trilogy, particularly Up Your Arsenal. Now, the Gaming Brit is a really great YouTube channel, Critical Analysis. Has a lot of great videos on how he thinks that Ratchet and Clank 2 and 3 lost a lot of the good elements from the first one. Especially like some of the attitude, the writing dropped. Felt like the puzzles and action platforming weren't as good. I remember 3 being like one of the greatest games I ever played. I haven't played it in years. I need to revisit it, but by the time it came out, it was incredible. And there was like a multiplayer mode and everything. So and the weapon set was nuts. You got the... It's still something that developers haven't figured out today. Just have a weapon wheel. Just have a weapon wheel. Anyway, all-timer. Some other games that I absolutely loved. More PS2 remasters. The God of War Collection. Loved both of these. Had them on PS2. I think that was in the set that I sold, including like Ratchet and Clank. Some of the greatest stories ever told in gaming, particularly God of War 1. It's a beautiful... Greek. It's in the form of a Greek tragedy. It is told as a Greek tragedy, but with some of the early 2000s sort of violence and sex that was found in games when it was more of a boys' club. I mean, it still quite is. But the God of War Collection, really, really great games. Obviously classics. And I've been playing that God of War 1 as well. And actually, I think people think that it's or rather people say that it's a sort of dumbed down version of character action games pioneered by Hideki Kamiya, like Bayonetta, Devil May Cry particularly, which came out and this inspired this. But actually I think on higher difficulties, you do really have to be thinking about what you're doing. So, you know, even the combat is underrated. Two other games that I'll just mention briefly. I have not played these, but God of War Origins Collection, it's for remasters of the PSP games, and then God of War Ascension. I haven't played these. These seem minor to me, as in like unimportant. But, you know, they're there if you like them. You can play all the God of War games on PlayStation 3, other than the, you know, 2018 and Ragnarok. And then this I also played, you know, tons and tons of, but my favorite game of all time was remastered on PlayStation 3. And when that came out, that was a day to celebrate. We've got Shadow of the Colossus and Ico, another one of my favorite games. Just two brief memories. I think this actually will be quite a long video, so I apologize. But these games are important to so many people, and you'll just hear it over and over again. This is the justification to anybody who doesn't think games are an art. Though you don't have to justify yourself to anyone. But if you did, these would be held up as shining examples because they take influences from the art world, from cinema, from artists like Giorgio, I think it's Chirichio, the Italian artist. They take these influences to make something that really only can, stories and experiences that really only can be experienced in games. For example, Ico, the simple act of holding Yorda's hand by holding down the button. And when you let go of her hand, and you let go of the button, you let go of her hand. That sort of experience, that sort of emotional connection is something that can only occur in a video game. Now, there's more deep things than that, but even simple emotional touches like that are just so thoughtful. Fumito Ueda is a genius, and I don't use that term often, but it is sad that he only has made 3 games so far, and we're waiting like another. It's been a decade since his last, almost a decade, maybe more than a decade actually. So it's sad, but you know, I guess greatness takes time. You know, it's not easy to make goated stuff like this so casually. So the experience of Ico and the Shadow of the Colossus. Shadow of the Colossus I got first. My mom and I were at Target, and I saw the greatest hits version, which I still have, of Shadow of the Colossus for $20 at Target. And at that time, you have to really justify a video game purchase to your parents. I think you might still have to, but I don't think you have to buy video games anymore. You can just like kids just buy Minecraft and then play it for the rest of their lives. Or buy Fortnite and then beg their parents to like spend money on their credit card for an Ariana Grande skin. But back then, you have to actually justify it to your parents. So it's like, I really want this. It looks amazing. I don't remember if I had been reading about it or not. I don't even remember how old I was. I was quite young. But got this, and it was just like the most shocking experience of beauty. Like, still that opening cinematic with the music. I'm about to faint. One of the greatest game ever. Maybe my favorite, tied up there with a couple others. And all the best memories about it. But also Ico, I remember also begging my mom. I was looking for a copy because I love Shadow of the Colossus so much. And I remember I obviously had to get it physically, and I was like looking on GameStop. Back then you could look up what stores nearby you had copies in stock. And the only one that had a copy of Ico in stock was like a 45-minute to an hour drive in like Mesquite. So I was like, Mom, we gotta get in the car right now, and you gotta drive me all the way to Mesquite to get this game, which was expensive for a used game at the time, still like $45 or something like that. And I can't even imagine her reaction. She was probably just like, where did I go wrong, this fucking kid? But she did it. This is the love of a mother. She did that. I would not do that for my children. But she did that. She took me all the way. And I remember I showed up and it was in decent condition. It was in good condition, complete in box. I think it had the manual. And it was another mind-blowing experience. Absolutely incredible. Loved every moment of it. Not to the level of Shadow of the Colossus, but I would like to replay it because I think they have equal merits. I think Shadow of the Colossus is maybe a little more influential, but Ico has equal merits in every way. And they're both thrilling, beautiful games. Now, I have not played The Last Guardian. It's one of the great shames of my life. which is good. I could have worse shames like being addicted to drugs, but I still have not played The Last Guardian because I missed the PS4 generation, and it's time to skip back in. So those are all the amazing remasters on the PlayStation 3. There's many more, like the Splinter Cell trilogy, though I don't have that. But there's so many great games that run really well and have been remastered really well. All of these included. Next, I'm being called by my parents for dinner. But next, I'd like to talk about some of the console exclusives that also blew my mind back then and really, I think, cemented me being a gaming fan going forward in my life.